Hey, bonjour.
Bien.
Ça va bien?
Come on in.
How are you doing?
Good, good. You?
I'm very good. Nice to meet you, Estine.
Okay.
I love it. This is awesome. Woo! Took a while to get here. Nice, great, awesome.
So, is it a long ride from Saint-Cloud?
A little bit.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
Okay, so I think photography captures a moment, and that's good for my memory. So when I look back at these pictures, I remember the state of mind I was in, why I took the picture, the emotions associated to the moment. So I think it's mostly that, because if you look at the pictures I take, they're not technically nice pictures, and I don't take the time to make the nice arrangement and everything for a picture, but I try to capture the moment. So with my son, especially, so right now, most of my pictures are pictures of my son. So it's in those moments when he's laughing, for example, and it can be chaos behind him, and it's not pretty, it may be blurry, but I remember that moment of him laughing and why he was laughing.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I have to burp, excuse me. Because I'm drinking this coffee. It's the first morning. Sorry.
Have you had breakfast?
What?
Have you had breakfast?
I think so, a long time ago.
Oh.
Okay. So I want to say, Sao-Mai?
Sao-Mai, yes.
Sao-Mai. So Sao-Mai, nice to meet you, Sao-Mai.
Nice to meet you.
We are back. We're still in Hong Kong. Back. What's the name of the studio again?
Senseless Art.
Senseless Art Studio. You were referred by the previous guest on the podcast, Rachel
Smith, yes.
Rachel Smith, who's really great. And she's like, oh, you have to talk to Sao-Mai. And I was like, okay. And she says, oh, you'll like her because she's from Montreal. I was like, okay. And so not only are you from Montreal, did you grow up in Pierrefonds or?
Yeah, I would say I'm mostly a West Islander.
Wow. So that's your accent? So West Island, yeah. So I grew up on the South Shore, and it is a little bit more Quebecois in the South Shore. And this accent, when I talk like this, does it remind you of home a little bit, or?
No, not necessarily.
What? See, you're hurting my feelings. Okay. West Island is more Anglophone.
I guess. I mean, I don't know. I don't really associate accents with much anymore.
Okay.
My brain, because I grew up with 3 languages,
Okay.
right? So I grew up speaking Vietnamese, and then I went to a bilingual school.
Okay.
And so I think my mind is much more juggling the content and which language we are in now. So somehow the accent doesn't...
It's funny. Interesting.
That doesn't either throw me off or make me emotional. It's just... I'm just focused on the content.
Right. In my house, it was the same, but not Vietnamese. It was Hebrew, French, and English. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me on Shooting It Raw. It's obviously very raw. It's very off the cuff. And as we learn about you, we'll go through the photographs. I'll learn about you and then see how you see the world and hopefully inspire other people. And I am super happy.
Okay.
For me, this is the best. So the photo that you send so you usually describe them so people have some kind of reference. Okay, so what we have is that it looks like a photo of a photograph.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So it's a photograph of a photograph, and it looks like a Time magazine style photo on a table that's in black and white, and the shot is some stairs going down into what probably looks like a ship maybe. And there are a lot of people packed on the 2 levels. So I think it looks like 2 levels of basically stairs going down into a ship, and it's a black and white photo. And there must be in the photograph maybe 40 or 50 people just crammed on top of each other, women, children, fathers, just all in together. And so, why is this photo the first one? And what's this mean? What is this for you?
So this is a picture that I took at Hong Kong Museum of Correctional Services.
Oh, wow.
I was very surprised to learn that something like that existed here in Hong Kong. It's in Stanley.
Okay.
And I went there when I first arrived in Hong Kong, so in 2017.
Okay.
Someone I knew, you just arrive in Hong Kong, you make friends with plenty of people, you start exploring around. So this person said, well, why don't we go explore Stanley and let's meet up at this museum.
That's a really
original
place to visit on your first. Yeah, okay.
Right?
Okay.
And so, and I was just up for anything, right? Just open, and came to Stanley for the first time. You see all of these big villas, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm going into a pretty high-end area of Hong Kong. Came to the Correctional Services Museum. So first floor, there's all of this history about prisons in Hong Kong, pirates, etc. And then at some point, the person with me said, hey, Sao-Mai, isn't this Vietnamese writing? So I came up, and it's a booklet all written in Vietnamese.
Okay.
And then next to it was a booklet in English and one in Cantonese. I was like, why Vietnamese?
Right.
Are Vietnamese people in Hong Kong so
a
large population of criminals in Hong Kong that they need a full booklet in Vietnamese for them?
Wow.
And so I was confused.
This
I didn't know what was going on.
This is a very intense introduction to Hong Kong.
And then so I went on the second floor, and then I understood why. It's because the Vietnamese refugees, when they came to Hong Kong, they were under the stewardship of the Hong Kong Correctional Services.
Oh, that's okay.
So they were within basically refugee camps that were closed off with barbed wire. And in a sense, they were considered prisoners. They weren't
guilty
free
until proven innocent.
Well, at least you're not free to roam around the city,
yeah.
right? So you have to stay in those camps. And so there were lots of artifacts that they have kept from that period. And so, for example, there were how people were distilling wine, alcohol, and there was how they were passing time with made-up cards, like decks of cards.
Right.
But there was also a whole section on violence.
Oh, wow.
Right, you'd have like sticks with barbed wire around it, saws, like handmade from scraps of metal.
Wow.
So people were rioting because the conditions were so poor, right? And there was also a helmet that they made out of the top of plastic pail, and then after they put like some sort of filling on top, so makeshift helmets.
Sure.
And so that struck me because I think in what I knew about refugee camps, Vietnamese refugee camps, was yes, the conditions were poor. I didn't hear about people fighting and rioting in order to fight against these conditions.
Wow.
Right. And so this picture was in a sort of room with a gallery of pictures, and it is a picture of how the refugees came to Hong Kong. So that was the boat in which they came. Right. So you have these people staring up at the camera. And for me, it just was a wake-up jolt, I think, because I wasn't planning on going through this range of emotions coming into Stanley, right? I was just like, I'm gonna chill in Stanley.
Yeah, I know.
And then this whole family history comes back because my mother's family, they were refugees living in boats like this. Oh, wow. And so it caught up. It caught up with me.
Do you know what date this photograph was made?
No, I don't remember.
Because it's a black and white shot. It looks, the feeling, like it looks like it's one page of a probably A4 size. It looks like a large. I mean, do you remember if it was like A4 size?
I don't remember. Okay. So this was in 2017 that I took it. Right. And like I said earlier, right, I take pictures to remember the moment or the emotions. So that's why I took it. But in terms of date, there were Vietnamese refugees as of 1975 until the 1990s. Right. So it could have been any time. Right.
To me, it's the look of the image and the clothing, the little telltale whatever that you can pull from the image says 70s, 80s. Like it feels like an older, and probably somebody is photographing it technologically the cameras were probably older. Yeah, it's an intense photograph because it looks chock-a-block with people, and it's probably really hot. And I mean, being in Hong Kong, must have been just so stifling and so intense.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess for me, this started me on my journey of writing because they're all staring up at me, right?
Right.
So it's like they're telling me, so now what are you going to do?
Okay.
Right? What are you going to do about this now? And I was reminded, I think, of how privileged I was.
Okay.
And when I came to Hong Kong, so I sort of on sabbatical, I had resigned from my job. I was in a mode of reconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know where I was going. I felt lost.
Open to experience.
Yeah, open to experience. But I wasn't necessarily in a positive state of mind then.
Oh.
Right? And so this was a reminder that, hey, wake up. You're really privileged in the middle of the day while most people are working to have the time to just go around Stanley and discover things, right?
I feel for you, though. I feel for you. So you're on vacation, and then, like, this is what greets you. Very sobering.
But it's sobering and I think humbling, and it just reminded me that, the freedom is something that people risk their lives for, and that people have to fight in order to maintain or to keep alive. And here you were born into freedom. So what are you going to do with it?
Where were you born?
In Canada, in Toronto.
Okay.
We moved to Montreal when I was a few months old. So.
Oh, wow. Okay. And I know I've heard you speak French. You're like full-on proper Quebecois. Good for you. I like it. Back home. Yeah. Okay, but then, so you come here, and this... Do you feel like, in a way... everything that made you up until that point shaped you to be, once you saw it, it kind of created that moment of epiphany of saying, oh, wait a second. Because like most people would see it and go like, wow, brutal. Wow, okay. But they wouldn't necessarily think the faces are looking at them, looking back at you saying, okay, what are you going to do about it? And yet that was how you internalized that image. In a sense, were you a person seeking? It was like this idea of you becoming a writer and you diving into this, that was all being shaped in the background, so that once you saw that image, that's okay, now this is where you're going. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, when I arrived here in 2017, part of my background already is I knew very well what my family stories are. So in our family, we tell a lot about the stories of the past. So it's oral storytelling mostly. I think as a sensitive girl, I just absorbed all of those stories in. Right? So those stories stayed with me. And then I was, I think, the first in my family to go to Vietnam.
Go back.
To go back.
Wow.
So my mother left in 1978. My father left in 1975. And they didn't go back. Right. So I went back in 2012, and there's like it was a whole journey of self-discovery, discovery of your roots. So I have all of that as well in the background. And I did start having ideas for a story for writing. Okay. But it was very... I would say superficial, or just like little notes here and there and bursts of ideas, but I never actually sat down to start writing.
Right.
So at the time I was working towards a legal career. I became a lawyer, and that was very time consuming, energy consuming. Wow. And so I didn't have any time and space for creative work. Right. And so then it was a great opportunity when my husband landed a job in Hong Kong. We came here, and I was like, okay, so this is probably a good moment to discover, things outside of my legal world. Wow. But I wasn't that certain yet about writing. Mm-hmm. But I think this moment made me say, okay, well, maybe I can jump back into it.
Oh, wow.
And so I wrote an article for the American Women's Association. So it was an association that I joined right when I came to Hong Kong, just to make friends, really.
Yeah.
And they have a magazine, and they were looking for stories. They're always looking for stories. I thought, okay, this could be an opportunity, because a lot of their stories is about discovering Hong Kong, what to do in Stanley or what to do in Sha Tin, etc. So I was like, okay, well, you can go to the Correctional Museum. Here's my take on it. And I remember, I wrote it very quickly.
Right.
And I think all of these thoughts and emotions came out in
flood.
In a flood. There you go. Sent it in, and I remember receiving a note from the director, I think, or president, I don't know how you call it, of the American Women's Association, saying, just read your article, I was really touched. And by the way, I mean, if you like writing, this is, we welcome you with open arms for you to write whatever you want in the article, looking forward to read more from you. And I think an older version of me would have been very flattered by it and jumped on the opportunity to say, oh, yes, I'm going to write now for the American Women's Association, maybe put that into my CV, blah, blah, blah. But I actually never wrote again for the magazine because it's as though this experience opened up the questioning of, no, really, what do you want to do that is meaningful?
Oh, wow.
I was no longer in the mode of looking for validation from the outside world anymore, but it was, okay, really, they're asking you, what are you going to do about it, right? So I decided not to be sidetracked by writing simply for writing and to make a career out of it, but I wanted to write something that would mean something for me.
Okay. Thank you.
What's going on through your mind?
No. It's more like I know that you're is it artist in residence?
Yes.
Yeah, here. Okay, so here we are in this space. Rachel invites you in to be the writer in residence, artist in residence. And my first degree in Montreal was in creative writing.
Okay.
So I really, for 3-4 years, 5 years, a slow student, was really surrounded by what is the stuff of writing, not only professionally, but also more importantly, like, what is it to write? And so your training at a young age put you through law, which is a certain kind of writing, right? Like
correct.
You definitely got that training of how to express yourself clearly, methodically, and it shaped how you think. And then you come here and you're fortunate that in Canada, you're not disassociated from your cultural background, right? In America, it's like, we're all Americans. Come on. It's great. Canada, it's like multiculturalism. You keep, your Vietnamese is a huge part of who you are and your identity. Okay. And all of that is part of what brings you to Hong Kong. And then you discover this. It's amazing that this one photograph catalyzes that internal transformation. And then you're like, well, I don't know if I want to write as a professional. I'm talking this through because I'm processing, and hope maybe somebody who's listening will go like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. Maybe not. But as a writer, I have my own connections to how you interpreted that and what writing is for you and how it's evolved into this. So I don't know if the next photograph takes us down that road even more.
Yes.
So let's use this.
All right.
So again, I'm going to sigh again and say thank you. This is great. Thank you. Is that number 2?
That's number 2.
Awesome. So the next photograph is very different in feeling. It's a photograph of you in a sound studio. You've got large earphones over your head. There's a mic coming down from the top. you're reading off it's like a sheet music note for the musicians use to hold up the sheet music. You're in a studio of some sort. You're recording. You're wearing a kind of a cream colored jacket because the aircon's probably on really too strong. And what makes a photograph so endearing is that your nose is partially wrinkled, but you're sticking your tongue out. It's a sweet photo, and it's called "Searching for My Voice." Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this was me recording a story of Hong Kong stories for a program on RTHK.
Oh, okay.
Right. So
the radio in Hong Kong.
Yes. So for all of you who have already heard Rachel Smith's episode, so she's the mistress and magician behind Hong Kong Stories. So I've been part of Hong Kong Stories since 2017, and it's been a huge part of my journey here in Hong Kong. So I joined actually 3 days after landing in Hong Kong.
Oh, wow.
I was searching for groups,
on a mission,
etc. Yes, making friends, but also because I was on sabbatical, right? And I was already thinking, what am I going to do with this free time? And storytelling was already something that was compelling to me before I came to Hong Kong. So I immediately signed up, and it's been an amazing experience.
For sure.
Yeah. So I've been coached by other storytellers for 4 stories, I'd say. And then after I started feeling comfortable enough to become a host myself.
Nice.
And being a host actually has been extremely fun, extremely rewarding. To help other people find their voice, I think, is what I saw my role as a coach.
Yeah.
But in this picture, it was me at the very beginnings, right? So I was still in search of my own voice.
Yeah.
But it was after going to that museum where I decided, okay, so I do want to go explore this area, storytelling, family history, but I didn't know what kind of angle. And I guess you as a writer would understand that, it takes time, I find, to know what you actually want to write about.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And what's great with Hong Kong Stories is you get basically immediate feedback.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's oral storytelling, so you're raw in the moment.
Yeah.
And then you have the response, the immediate response from an audience.
Yeah.
But you have your own response to yourself, right? Do I feel good telling this story? Right? Does it open up things that you want to explore more?
Yeah.
And so in this photo, I was recording the story of me going back to Vietnam for the first time, and it did touch upon a bit of my grandfather's story and what happened to him after the Vietnam War. So in 1975, South Vietnam lost the war against the North, and so the whole country became communist.
Yeah.
And my family was from the South. My grandfather at the time was the director of a hospital, and after a year, then he was in prison.
Yeah.
And actually, the family didn't know where he was for a year,
Wow.
right? And it's only a year after he was released, etc., that they did all of these. They managed to flee. Basically, I won't go into details, but that's a very brief summary of what happened after 1975.
Wow. Okay.
And so I touched upon that era of post-1975 in this story. And in the next story, which is called Dark Waters, that one I touch upon the refugee experience.
Sure.
So my mother as among the boat people.
Right.
And I found that I actually don't want to explore the refugee anymore.
Okay.
Right? Even though that first picture was all refugees staring up at me and saying, what are you going to do now?
Yeah.
I figured that, no, the refugee narrative is one that we have heard of a lot already, the Vietnamese refugees. So in that story, Dark Waters, it's about me acting for a video clip about that part of history, right? The boat people and how they were welcomed into Canada.
Right.
So I felt like the script has already been written there.
Okay.
But what we don't hear about as much is why they left.
Right. Okay.
Right? I remember, growing up and talking to people about, yes, my parents were refugees, and people would say, oh, it's terrible, wasn't it, the war? It's like, no, wait a minute. It wasn't the war. They didn't leave during the war.
Right.
They left after the war, once they lost the war.
Right.
Right, and the conditions of life became so difficult after the war that's when they left.
Yeah.
Right, and so I think I slowly found that this was what I wanted to explore more, even though it was more challenging.
Yeah.
But it was, I think, more meaningful for me at the time.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know what else.
No, it's great. No, it's absolutely fantastic.
But I mean, storytelling, I think, beyond writing, I think I don't love writing. Like, to be frank with you, I don't love it. Like, the sitting and the finding the right word it's a lot of work. I don't mind work, but I'm much more of a storyteller.
Okay.
I have much more fun when I'm thinking about the character's psychology, the cause and effects in the story, and how desires and needs lead to certain actions, and then leads to consequences, and leads to change. That kind of thinking is something that I enjoy much more. So yeah, I think Hong Kong Stories was perfect for me.
Yeah.
Exploring the oral storytelling, but of course for this story, I thought about it a lot. Is writing the right medium, or should it be theater? But in the end, I went for writing because I think it serves the story better.
Sure, and there's also something about writing that, in a way, it becomes quite. In some ways, it's a bad thing because it becomes final. It becomes so anchored. And then in another way, it becomes like your best effort to capture your thinking. So as it happens, I'd mentioned that, my wife and I were in the tsunami in 2004. And I actually just reread what I had written a couple of days ago. So 2 days ago, I sat down and I thought, I'm going to reread what I wrote. And so what I wrote was captured at about 2004, 2005. It was actually it was soon after. And in my mind, I really wanted to capture my thoughts and interpretations and all this stuff. And that's what I wrote. And here we are, like, so many years later. And kind of that really captured, as best as I could, the thinking at the time. It's true that in telling the story, you make it more alive with another person in front of you, and then you have the human connection. But so, for example, turning your story into theater, at some point you kind of have to. It's good to have a kind of a source, that you can turn back to and say, okay, that's, for better for worse, my final word on it. Okay, well, you want to go? You want to continue?
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to take my notebook out for something.
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
No, of course. We'll just keep it all cut and paste. Yeah, for sure. Is it because you're going to read to me?
It can serve at some point.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how nervous are you?
Kind
In
of.
your energy. Really? But it's just me.
It's just because I think I spend a lot of time alone. Right? Like with kids or alone, right? I feel like a conversation with an adult about adult subject matter. Like, adult subject matter I deal with, but in my head. But then actually expressing it, finding words in live, that's
high five me on that one. Awesome. No, it's good. It's good. But it's also the podcast is pretty intense because we go into these, like, in a way, what is the most intense territory for you? And let's dive into that, right? So the previous podcast was clearly that for the previous guest. Like, what's really important to you? Let's dive into it. And right now, where is your head at? What are you thinking about? Let's dive into it and, in a way, articulate and shape what you're thinking about. So, that may not have been a question.
So you just want me to talk about something that's
No,
important
you can
to
just
me?
yeah, but that's what the podcast is kind of what we're doing is we're just diving into the world of ideas and experience and like what's important to you. Like how do you make sense of the world, really?
Sure. Well, since we're talking about storytelling,
Yeah.
might as well. I will read to you what I wrote down here the other day. I quoted. Do you know LeVar Burton?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. So I listened to something that he was saying, and he said, "The job of a storyteller is that of a truth teller. You got to bring the truth. You got to be willing to stand in your truth and express it. Because if you don't, it just gives people permission to forget, to ignore, to obfuscate, and to change the narrative." So I think that's what I've been working on quite a bit with my story is narrative, this idea of narrative, and that there are some narratives that have been given more space than others. So in this situation, it's, the Vietnam War was very long. And then in the end, it was tragic for everyone involved. But you'll have a winner and a loser, right? And you have, so the winners here was the communist North. And so their narrative gets told, right? It has more power to be spread and to reach out to people. And then you have the American narrative because they're a very powerful country.
Yeah.
But what happens to the narrative of the South Vietnamese, those who lost the war, like the Americans, who were the allies of the Americans, and who had to continue in that country living with the consequences of losing the war, and then going through that huge transformation as losers of the war, but then under a totalitarian form of government. Right. So that's where I'm coming from. Like this is the narrative that I want to put out there. And not in a didactic way, but through going through what it was as an experience. So what the characters lived through. And I get inspired by what my family went through.
Of course you would. Yeah.
And so that's one theme, storytelling. And the other theme of my writing is intergenerational trauma.
Okay.
Right? Because I am the generation that didn't live through that.
Yeah.
But I have absorbed so much of the stories that it then becomes part of my identity as well. And what's that experience like?
Right. Being audio, people can't see your face. I can see it on your face. This is, of course, extremely meaningful for you, and it's extremely profound, but also, the source of this, like intergenerational trauma. Now, I come from a family that is also quite real, right? Like, my parents were kicked out of North Africa, out of Morocco, went to Israel, fought in the various wars in Israel, moved to Canada, and like, the Jewish people have this idea of intergenerational trauma baked into the cultures. A lot of the core mythologies, So when you speak, I can connect to that from my side, being in Montreal and the South Shore, and the small family and the storytelling, and it's interesting that I think you're like a spirit sister who went off in one direction but went to law, which is a very precise way of selecting, cutting, organizing ideas. So how would you say your legal training influences how you approach storytelling?
Well, I think I can take time to think, right?
Absolutely. No, because here's what's really interesting. I shoot before I aim, which shows that I'm more of a crazy poet. You aim before you shoot, which to me says you're a clearly a legal mind in a way. It's a compliment. But yeah, take time. Think about it. You're not being interrogated, by the way.
Well, I think for the first thing I'd say of my influence of the legal background is, I guess we can come to method later, but first of all is the content. So one of my classes during my legal training with truth, reconciliation, and Aboriginal perspectives.
Oh, wow.
And that was such an eye-opening class to me. And I remember crying in that class, right? Because I had never heard about residential schools before.
Right.
Never.
Right.
And it took me until the age of, 23 to learn about it. And it just made my jaw drop that I had been missing out on this whole different narrative of Canadian history for my whole life.
Yeah.
Right? And it's a very painful history, and it's a history that hadn't been dealt with on a large scale so that we can all process it together as a country, as communities. And so that was like so eye-opening for me. But then it made me, like, there's a back voice saying, hey, wait a minute, truth, reconciliation. I mean, it's great that we were able to have that commission and that national dialogue. Of course, we can debate about how much work still needs to be done, and the answer is huge.
Sure.
But at least there was that discussion.
Yeah.
Whereas my family never got that discussion
Right.
about what they went through and the pain that they went through,
Yeah.
right? Because it was a civil war. One side won. The side that won imposed a certain narrative, and everyone had to accept it, or else
Yeah.
there were very difficult consequences, right,
Sure.
to the threat of your life. So it's harder to heal and process when you haven't had the chance for your truth and your narrative to be heard, and two, that connection with quote unquote the other side, so that the healing process can be initiated and then walked along together, right?
Yeah.
And so that started to make me think, well, then okay, so for my family, what's the alternative? What's the option for them? So that's another big theme of my writing, is about healing and reconciliation. Because I don't think we can expect until, it will take a lot of time before a reconciliation commission is put up for the Vietnamese experience. So what do we do to heal? What do we do to move on? Because it's, maybe this is from a Buddhist perspective, but in order to be peaceful inside, you need to let go, right? But how do you let go when your story isn't heard? Right? So you have to cling on to your story. You have to tell it again and again, so that part of your identity can still be validated, right? Can still have meaning. Your suffering, the pain that you went through, can still have meaning because there's this story, there's this whole backdrop. If we forget it, if I let go, then how, how can I still give meaning? How will future generations still give meaning? But then if you don't let go, then you can't heal. It's harder to find peace inside. Right. So that's the first, I think, springboard for me from my legal studies, is that class. Class that just really got to me and made me think about my own personal history. Right.
Okay. Processing. Thank
you. So that's in terms of content. Now, I think part of what you're asking for is in terms of method, right?
Or practice.
Well, I think as a lawyer, you're very conscious that there are different narratives, right? When you're defending a client, you're putting forth the narrative that's going to serve them most.
So did you work as a lawyer?
I did.
Okay. So you because it's one thing to go to school and to learn principles and theoretical and all this stuff. And it's another thing to actually go out and do the work.
Right.
And so...
So yes, I didn't work as a litigator, but I did train in a law firm in the litigation department. And I remember, you were given all of these facts, and then I loved it. I love that part where you narrate the facts, right? These are the facts, and I'm going to put them into specific paragraphs to lead whoever who is reading, like the judge, etc., through what is happening. Right? And you will normally do it in a way that is going to serve what you want to say about the rights of your clients, right? Yeah. But I think you're also very conscious that you can probably say it differently, and it would be serving the other party, right?
Yeah, like you end up directing the attention. Well, the attention you sort of directing the bias of what conclusion you want the person to get to at the end.
And so I think I was very conscious of the variety of narratives, and that storytelling can be used for an end. Now the question is, what end? Right? And so in the case of lawyering, it is to the end of defending the rights of the person who is asking you to defend their rights. But now if you bring that to other levels, like let's say if we talk about collective storytelling, right? To what end? Right? If now we tell a story that obfuscates something, why do you obfuscate it? Right? And it has consequences. It has consequences on the kind of community that we build, on the kind of dynamics that we have within that community. So to go back to my shock in the class of Truth, Reconciliation, and Aboriginal Perspectives is, why has a whole lot of perspective been obfuscated from my education when I grew up?
Right? Your experience,
right? So to what end? Was it to build a national narrative that would go a certain way, that would be positive? The Canadian... whatever, that Canada is nice, Canada is or something, but then we don't talk about what was tragic, right? So that, that goes back again to storytelling and its power on both ends. So it's power to help heal if you have the intention to use storytelling to heal and to bring people together. But storytelling can also divide, and storytelling can hurt, and storytelling can erase.
Yes. Woo. Shall we move on to the next photo as well?
Yes, we can.
Okay. No, this is great because it's also just a sense to keep the conversation moving, but each sort of photograph opens a window into your world, and it clearly communicates, what's important to you and how you see the world, which hopefully will inspire somebody else.
I'm all in.
So for the next photograph, what's great is that when you look at it, it's very flat in the sense that because of the composition, it was done at basically high noon. It's of a forest. The cleared ground. There are a couple of concrete things that are kind of cleared off. Hard to know what those concrete things. It could be benches, but they're quite low to the ground. There's a kind of it's just a big sort of an empty clearing or forest scene. If I look closely, the trees kind of look like trees in Hong Kong. So it's like subtropical. Yeah, if I were to put my life down to it, I'd say it was in Hong Kong. But yeah, so what is this photograph? It's called Truth and Healing.
Yes. Right. Oh, well, perfect. I was just talking about truth and healing, right? So I love your sense of observation.
Oh, okay.
And let's see how you react to this. This is the cemetery of the South Vietnamese soldiers in Vietnam.
Okay, so this is in Vietnam.
This is in Vietnam,
okay.
Right.
So I got the foliage okay.
And you can see there are like 3 types of tombstones.
Right.
Right. To the right there, you have one that's a little red, and it seems like there has been some incense that was burned.
Yeah.
So that is tombstone that has been visited.
Okay.
Whereas you have other types of tombstones. Here when you say there is concrete that seems cracked.
It's just slabs.
It's just slabs,
Yeah.
yeah. And with time, roots and everything have made it, have broken them.
Oh, wow.
And you see right next to it is just an earth mound. So those ones don't even have a slab on top
please
anymore.
Don't tell me this is like a cemetery divided by political...
So this is the story of me trying to find the truth.
Okay.
But never really finding it.
Wow.
So I've heard a lot of stories about this cemetery, that it was damaged by those who won the war, or that it was closed off to the public and people couldn't go visit anymore, or that it was still open but people were terrified of going to visit because then you associate yourself with the South.
Okay.
And so...
this is South Vietnam?
Yes.
Okay.
And so a lot of these went into a state of disrepair, as you can see.
Sure.
Right? That's why you say this is a park or a forest and foliage.
Yeah,
but you barely see the stones anymore. And so I always said, okay, I want to go visit this place so that I get down to the truth of it, what happened to it. And if I'm about to write something about it, I need to, A, see it, and 2, I don't want to write something just hearsay. I want to know what really happened. Right? This is a bit my method. So when I used to do theater, I used to really be into it. I remember doing a scene about a girl in Yukon, and she was drinking gin, really cold in Yukon, in the middle of winter, outside. And it was December, January in Montreal, and I bought myself gin. Never drank gin before in my life.
Yeah.
Went out to the park past midnight, drank gin to have a feeling of what it's like to be freezing and drinking gin. Right? So this is, bringing this to the writing is, okay, I have to really go to this place.
What a beautifully Canadian example. Yeah.
So back to the tropical scenery. So I came there, and this is what I saw. Like I said again, in the photography, I don't take good pictures, right? So you can barely see much in this picture. The lighting's terrible. But I did want to...
Unless this is actually exactly the best photograph for that place in that moment.
Right, maybe.
You know what I mean? Like in some ways, it's... If we put the value judgment of, well, aesthetically, how does it land? Well, maybe the aesthetics of it land just right. Because as an observer, what you saw me reacting to it was precisely that, this is a cemetery that has been neglected, whatever, and how does this honor the history or whatever? So, if anything, it's a perfect photograph. You mean? Like...
Thank you. So I wasn't thinking of that in the moment.
Sure.
When I took it, I was actually a bit terrified. I was wondering if I was allowed to take this picture or not. But it made me really sad, that these people don't even have names anymore.
Right.
And their slabs are broken, who knows by what. And, I've visited other cemeteries of those who fought for the winning side.
Yeah.
And it's like there's the word Lirché on everything, meaning like national hero. And, it's tragic for everyone. But depending on which side you are on, it determines whether or not anyone cares about you after you die or not.
Yeah.
And so this is me trying to find truth but not finding it. But at the end of the day, it's like, well, maybe that's not what's important. But what's important is to be able to move on from here.
Okay.
Like, how do we move on from this? And that's hard. It's hard because the part of me, after all, I did go into law. There's the part of me that's more vindicative, that wants, to have the truth out there, to tell, what is right, what is wrong.
Okay.
But then sometimes when you can't do that, or sometimes it no longer serves the purpose that you want. If the purpose is to reconcile and for healing, then holding on very tightly to you were wrong or we were right or whatever. It doesn't serve the purpose anymore.
Right.
So it made me really sad, but I was like, okay, well, maybe we just have to move on from it and just say that it was a terrible national tragedy.
Yeah.
But still, it doesn't totally sit right either.
No.
So, when I write, there's always those two voices talking to me. Like sometimes I'm more in the direction of wanting to prove a point. And then after, when I read back, I'm like, well, maybe not, maybe you have to go into the direction that is more about coming together and trying to work out that pain so that something like this doesn't happen again and that we don't cause this type of pain to each other again.
Sure.
Right? But those are the two voices that totally, that sometimes still come into conflict with each other.
Right.
Like when recently, for this podcast, I looked up online what's the cemetery called so that I could tell you. And it's called now Bình An, which means peace.
Okay.
The Peace Cemetery. And so my first reaction was...
very different than what you're describing.
Yeah, so my first reaction was, well, that's hypocritical.
Right.
Why would you call it that when, we haven't reconciled, we're still not through with, we haven't found inner peace about what happened to the cemetery. How can you call it peace? But then the other voice said, well, maybe that's a stepping stone in the right direction, and that's what we should aim for.
Right.
So that's part of what I sometimes struggle with when I write.
Sure.
What kind of intention do I want? And that intention actually seeps into everything, right? Into all of my decision making when I write. Like, what kind of characters do I want them? So, sometimes you make one character too much of a victim. You're like, well, no, actually, they also have agency in it. They're not just a victim.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
you don't want either to put some other characters as villains because of your own personal anger. That, for the reader, just, that character loses credibility because we're all human. So I have to always remind myself to keep in mind that it's not about right or wrong. It's something bigger.
Right.
And when I remind myself of that, then I can make more rounded and realistic characters.
Right. I'm going to leave that to sit. And I'm going to move on to the next photo.
All right.
Okay. Because it's a lot. And we could easily talk about these things and these important deep themes, for a long time. And my main response to that is maybe in your training by in law it tends to be a kind of one versus the other, this or that, or these two voices, or these two as opposed to, in my head, how I see it or hear it, or it's 100 people arguing. Nobody's right, everybody's wrong, unhappy, happy, contradicting, conflicting. Maybe that's just how I hear. So
right, and that comes through with your podcast, right? Bringing all of these voices to the table.
Yeah, kind of schizophrenic, but hey, well, something will come out. So this one is called Space to Create.
Yes.
Okay, so in the photograph, it's basically a shot of the of the space we're in right now, as if the photographer was standing just beyond the table where we are and is photographing the studio that's empty. And so there's a table, there's a cup of tea or coffee on the table, there's another smaller table, there's Rachel's mannequins, there's the windows out onto the Prince Edward area. So why would you include this photograph when you curated your set?
Because this was part of my every week life since the beginning of 2021, and I'm so grateful for it. And I think when we create, we have to always remind ourselves of all of the people that we're grateful for. And I think this picture is an entry point for me to talk about that. And this shot was taken the first day I came to the studio after Rachel and I arranged for me to be the artist in residence.
Nice.
So it was the first time I came to the studio alone. I had the keys that Rachel gave me.
Nice.
And I just felt so happy and so calm and grateful. I'm actually tearing up talking about this.
Yeah.
Because it was like a gift from heaven, but
For sure.
heaven equals Rachel. So 2020 was when I said I was going to finish my first draft
Okay.
of the book that I was writing,
Okay.
that I am writing. And 2020 was what it was, right?
Yeah.
It threw some unexpected things at us, and my original plan was to write at the library because at home it's difficult with, so at the time I had a 1-year-old. Actually in this picture, yeah, so he's 1-year-old. But at the beginning of 2020, he wasn't even 1-year-old yet. So I was trying to go back into my story, write while having a 9-month-old. And it was a lot to juggle. And then 2020 came. Of course, you had to deal with, buying all of the hygiene stuff, etc. Dealing with this new
and where we are, it being, this is not a quiet space outside of the building.
No, yeah. And then the library's closed.
Right.
Right? And I was like, so where am I going to write? And I do have a little desk space in my home, but when I'm hearing my son, it's really hard to dive into, the themes of intergenerational trauma. Right? So I did what I could. I went to cafes sometimes, but I'm the type of person who really needs silence in order to create. So it was tough. But I remember during that year that Rachel, at some point I was telling her, because I knew that she's an artist, I was like, I'm really struggling with the process of creating, because I was from a legal background and I was used to having deadlines, pushing to get to the deadline because, deadlines are prescribed by law. You have to get to it. And here I was, I think, putting in that same energy and mindset into my first draft, and it was totally not working. Right? Because the more I put pressure, the more somehow my creative brain was like, nope, going off for a walk, I'm not doing this. Right? And so I was struggling through just the creative process and the self-doubts as well.
Sure.
Right? And so Rachel said, well, why don't you just tell me the story? What are you up to? And it was the first time I shared my story in detail with someone. And I was really nervous, right? I had kept it all to myself before because I think I had a fear of judgment. And I was seeing myself as this solo worker. And then I said, okay, no, I think I really need a second pair of ears. And she was amazing. She gave me wonderful feedback, told me about how certain things in the story was resonating with her. So that was great feedback because, I just tapped into something universal here. Good, keep those. And then she would just give pointers. I'd like to hear more about this or more about that, or this part perhaps maybe not as central to your storyline or what you want to say. I still have, in my binder of notes, a note going, amazing meeting with Rachel. And I wrote down everything that she gave me. And so this was an insight into, wow, sometimes it takes, well, no, not sometimes, I'll take that out. It takes allies, and it even takes a village for a work of art to be created. Right? And I think it's a myth to sit alone at your desk, and toiling through with it. Having a second pair of eyes, ears is immensely helpful.
Sure.
And then it was a few months later that she proposed that I come here to write. And so again, an act of generosity on her part, right? And it changed everything for me. So in this year, I advanced the story so much more than in 2020 because of this space that was conducive to creativity. If you look at this picture, you have these paper mobiles, right? She's taken them off now, but they used to hang
I saw
here.
them when I came.
And so sometimes I would just be stuck, and I'd lie down on the floor and look at the mobiles and just look at them turn around, and then somehow, ideas can come back into place. And that's something that's very different from my sort of Cartesian way of working before, or my training. I think as a lawyer, I never lied down on my back in the office.
Ask the heavens, where should I go?
Exactly.
Yeah, I love it.
So it's just this space has given me permission to be weird and to open up to different ways of doing, even if they don't work out and I have to restart.
Yeah.
But that's part of the creative process, and this space has given me, that safety to just explore it and find yourself and your way of creating. And it's always wonderful to have Rachel there as a supporting voice.
Yeah, well, as a kind of, who will feed, like if you get blocked, speak to somebody else who's tapped into that idea of thinking and being creative, and just to help you. And
to see as well, when you look around, there are things that are still in process that aren't finite yet. And so it gives me permission to be cool with my story, not advancing, being stuck, not being as far along as I would want it to be.
That's
so that's
fantastic.
Space. And I think the other thing from this story that from this photo, is there's a book right there. There's a book on the table. So I was reading that, and it's The Book Thief.
Okay.
By Marcus Zusak. So that was lent to me by Rachel.
Okay.
After she heard my story, she said, you might want to read this. And yes, it was inspiring as well. So I took some inspiration from there. So again, just that meeting with Rachel opened up so much more resources for me. Right. So I think it's something to be reminded of, that creating needs allies, right? And so Rachel is one ally, but I'd say, my other biggest ally is my husband, right? Because throughout all of this process, he's been super patient and giving me that time to find my voice, because it takes time, to make errors. I've scrapped my whole first draft before I had to restart, and it has consequences for a couple that I'm not working. Right. But for him to shoulder that, I'm going to start being teary again.
It's, it's okay. I feel that emotion. And when you say that to me, you're being supported. He's being supported. It's like, what I mean? Like,
hugely
as a
supportive.
gift. Right?
Yes.
And
as a gift of love. Yeah. And, he's not in the creative world, right? So some of this thing, he might not get it. He's not the type to be lying on the floor and watching mobiles for an hour to find his idea. But he's been so understanding that I have this journey that I need to complete for my own happiness and finding my own meaning in life, that he is going to give me that space and time to find it. While you have a 1 to 2 to 3 year old child. Yeah, right? Look, I agree 1,000%. And then the other person is, I want to mention her because without her, I wouldn't be able to do this either, is my helper, Jeannabelle, because I think they don't get enough credit for the huge amount of work that they do. And I wouldn't be able to do any of this right now if I didn't have this trust relationship with her, that I know that my son is with her right now. In a way, let's just say that you're a production house. And this production house has to put out this product called a finalized novel, a finalized book. But part of your production team includes your husband, who's on top of, let's say, your finance and operations, and you got your helper who's part of like the back office, like whatever, however you want to create that analogy. As the person who's synthesizing this story to kind of tell the story, and I'm sure anybody who listens to this can hear in your voice that you're kind of seeking healing, but it's like a self-healing, community healing exercise.
that is clearly a great source of energy and inspiration for yourself. But would you have already given great advice to somebody who's thinking of writing, that you get a room of your own, to quote Virginia Woolf. Like, you have to have a room of your own, the space of your own. But what else can you say to kind of give the person the permission to kind of say, you know what, I'm going to go on that path, whatever that path looks like?
I'd say two things.
You can say whatever you want,
right?
And take as long as you need.
So I think the first thing is you have to start somewhere, right? I think I didn't give myself permission to start for a very long time. And I think maybe I'm a bit of the anxious person who can see too much how things can go wrong, right? And so I delayed. But what I found extremely encouraging and empowering is once you start, you will find A, the resources within yourself, and B, the resources in other people, the allies that you will meet. They will come along the way, right? So just trust it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what can give that impetus to start and to trust your work is what kind of intention do you want to have for your work, right? And that will maintain you throughout, the journey with its ups and downs, especially the downs, because you will be visited by self-doubt. You will be visited by moments when you feel like it's not working, that what you're doing isn't worth it anymore, or that it's not a question of value of what you're doing, but that it's technically not working. The characters aren't coming together, the storyline is just blocked. There will be moments like that. But if your intention is strong, and I think in my case I've had to work on that intention, it has evolved with time, I think, from truth seeking towards more the healing. Once that is strong, then it gives you that drive to continue.
Beautifully said.
And I think the other thing is to continue to have gratitude for everything that you receive from others and just the universe.
Being thankful,
thankful, because that's also a great driving force. I remember when I did theater, every time before I went on stage, I would bring back, everything that I'm grateful for to be here, all the people that I'm grateful for, because it takes the ego away.
Yeah.
You've already received. You're not doing this to look good or to etc. It's, you're giving back now because you've received so much.
Sure.
And so when you take the ego out of the creating process, somehow I find the work is better.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And so on that, I thank you as well.
So wise.
Because I've been able, through this exercise, I think, to pull the threads of these last few years. As you know, I'm leaving Hong Kong in 2 weeks.
Wow.
So it's been a great way to just look back and see what I've been through, everything I want to bring back with me to Montreal. So I think the universe brought you here for at
Here's
the best
really
time.
And I hope this is something, it's not going to go anywhere as far as these recordings go, but come back to it after a year, and then you'll be able to hear it, listen to it, and say, that's where I was, and you will hear the emotion, and you will hear the awkward pauses. Well, it's not even awkward, just the pauses while you think, and you think, oh God, where you're like, how do I arrange my thoughts in a sequence to communicate what I'm feeling? And thank you so much.
Thank you, Ran.
Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw.